The Galactic Council saw a small, soft human and thought he was prey. The alien scanner labeled him fragile. But they forgot one simple fact: Earth is a Class 12 death world. We evolved in crushing gravity. Watch what happens when an 8-foot rock monster punches a human, and realizes he just punched a wall of living steel. The Grand Galactic Hall was the most important room in the universe. It was a massive dome made of glass and gold that floated in the center of a neutral space station. The ceiling was so high that clouds formed inside the room. Thousands of seats curved around a center stage, rising high into the air like a great mountain of metal. This was where the council met. This was where the fate of galaxies was decided. The room smelled of sulfur, ozone, and wet iron because so many different alien species were gathered in one place. The noise was loud. It sounded like thunder as thousands of heavy creatures breathed, moved, and whispered to one another. Every species in the Grand Galactic Hall looked powerful. There were the Drexel, who were giant crabs with shells that could stop a laser blast. There were the Horde, who were made of living metal and stood 3 meters tall. There were creatures with sharp claws, rows of jagged teeth, and 4 arms. Some had skin made of scales, while others burned with natural fire. To be a member of the council, a species usually had to be strong, scary, and dangerous. Weakness was not respected in this part of the galaxy. If you could not fight, you were usually made into a servant. Today, the hall was unusually loud because a new species was joining the council. The doors at the bottom of the amphitheater hissed open. A white light shined from the hallway. The thousands of alien ambassadors leaned forward in their chairs. They wanted to see the warriors of Earth. They expected giants. They expected monsters with fangs or cybernetic armor. They expected to see something that could survive the harsh cold of space. The entire room went silent as the new species walked into the light. 3 figures walked into the room. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The aliens looked at each other in confusion. The newcomers were incredibly small. They were barely 2 meters tall. They had no thick shell to protect them. They had no sharp claws on their hands. They did not have 4 arms or acid spit. Their skin looked soft and squishy, in shades of pink and beige. It looked like it would tear if someone just poked it with a sharp finger. They wore no battle armor. Instead, they wore strange, soft clothes made of fabric. The leader of the humans was a male named Dave. To the giant alien monsters, Dave looked like a pet. He was short and had thinning gray hair on top of his head. He wore small circles of glass over his eyes to help him see. He carried a small leather bag in one hand. He did not walk like a predator stalking its prey. He walked like he was tired and just wanted to find a chair to sit down. Behind him were 2 other humans, a male and a female, who were frantically typing on small data pads. They looked nervous, but Dave just looked bored. High up in the seats, the ambassador of the Old whispered to his neighbor. The Old were gas clouds inside glass suits. He said that it must be a joke. He asked how such soft, tiny creatures could survive evolution. They had no natural weapons. A stiff wind could probably knock them over. The neighbor, a dragon-like creature, laughed. He said the humans were probably just a food source for a stronger species. They looked delicious and tender. The council must have made a mistake inviting them here. But the biggest reaction came from the Crawl Empire. The Crawl sat in the front row, the place reserved for the strongest warriors. The Crawl leader was General Vrog. Vrog was a nightmare made real. He stood over 8 feet tall. His skin was made of jagged, gray rock that was harder than diamond. Magma flowed through the cracks in his rocky skin, glowing red and orange. He wore heavy black armor on his shoulders and legs, powered by loud, humming engines. One of his fists was the size of a human's entire body. Vrog watched the little humans walk across the floor. He felt insulted. The Crawl believed that only the strong deserved to speak. Seeing these soft, pink things walking on the same floor as him made him angry. It was a mockery of the council. He snorted, and a puff of smoke came out of his nose. The heat from his body made the air shimmer around him. He stood up. The sound of his movement was like a landslide. His heavy metal boots clanked against the floor as he left his seat. The entire hall froze. Everyone knew what happened when General Vrog stood up. Violence usually followed. The other ambassadors stopped whispering. They watched with wide eyes. Vrog walked down the steps and onto the central floor. The floor plates shook with every step he took. He walked directly into the path of the humans. He stopped right in front of Dave. The size difference was comical. General Vrog towered over Dave. Vrog cast a giant, dark shadow that completely covered the human team. The general looked down with glowing yellow eyes. He let out a low growl that vibrated in everyone's chest. It was the sound of a predator about to eat. The other aliens flinched. They waited for the humans to run away screaming. They waited for the humans to beg for mercy. Dave stopped walking. He did not run. He did not scream. He simply stopped and looked up. He had to crane his neck all the way back just to see Vrog's face. The human adjusted his glasses with one finger. He didn't look scared. He looked slightly annoyed, like someone who was stuck in traffic. Vrog leaned down, bringing his rocky face inches away from the human. The heat radiating from Vrog was intense. It was like standing next to an open oven. Vrog bared his teeth, which were made of black obsidian. He wanted to smell the fear on the human. He wanted to see the little creature tremble. But the human just stood there. Dave shifted his weight to one leg and sighed. It was a long, tired sigh. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. The air felt electric. Thousands of eyes watched the center of the room. The Crawl General was a weapon of mass destruction. He had destroyed entire cities with his bare hands. And standing in his way was a soft, fleshy man with a leather bag. The council members felt a mix of pity and excitement. They knew the rules of the station forbade murder, but accidents happened all the time. If Vrog sneezed too hard, the human might break. Vrog crossed his massive arms. His biceps were thick like tree trunks. He blocked the way to the human seats. He was a wall of rock and rage. He waited for the human to speak. He waited for the apology. He waited for the submission. The silence stretched on for 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the air recyclers and the heavy breathing of the general. The humans were the smallest things in the room, but in that moment, they were the center of the universe. They looked so fragile against the backdrop of the massive, ancient hall and the giant rock monster. It seemed impossible that they belonged here. It seemed impossible that they could survive the next 5 minutes. The council prepared themselves to witness a tragedy. The small newcomers had walked into a den of lions, and the biggest lion had just stepped forward to greet them. The silence in the Grand Galactic Hall was thick and heavy. It felt like the air itself had turned into solid lead. General Vrog stood like a statue of volcanic rock, blocking the path of the small human delegation. The heat radiating from his body was making the air ripple, distorting the view for everyone behind him. He looked down at the human named Dave with pure disgust. To Vrog, this creature was an insult to biology. It had no armor, no weapons, and it looked like it was made of soft dough. Vrog decided to make a statement that the entire galaxy would remember. He gathered a large glob of burning saliva in his throat. With a sound like a cracking whip, he spat on the floor. The spit landed just inches from Dave's shiny black shoes. The liquid sizzled and smoked, burning a small hole into the expensive metal flooring of the council chamber. The reaction from the thousands of alien ambassadors was immediate. A wave of terrified whispers traveled around the massive dome. In the galactic community, spitting at someone's feet was not just rude, it was a declaration of war. It was the ultimate sign of disrespect. The ambassadors from the weaker systems covered their eyes or looked away. They did not want to see the massacre that was about to happen. They knew the Krull Empire. They knew that Vrog did not negotiate. He conquered. He crushed. And right now, he was looking at the humans like a boot looks at an ant. Everyone waited for Dave to fall to his knees and beg for his life. They waited for the human to cry or run away in terror. But Dave did not run. He did not cry. He looked down at the smoking hole in the floor near his shoe. He frowned slightly, the way a person frowns when they see a stain on a new carpet. He lifted his foot and checked the sole of his shoe to make sure none of the acid had touched the leather. Satisfied that his shoe was safe, he looked back up at the towering rock monster. Dave's face did not show fear. It showed exhaustion. He looked like a man who had been stuck in a long meeting and just wanted to go home to watch television. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a white handkerchief, and dabbed the sweat from his forehead. The heat coming from Vrog was making the room very uncomfortable. Vrog's yellow eyes narrowed. He was confused. This was not how things were supposed to happen. When Vrog stood in front of someone, they were supposed to tremble. They were supposed to smell like fear. But this human did not smell like fear. He smelled like cheap coffee and mints. This lack of reaction made Vrog furious. He felt like he was being ignored. In Krull culture, ignoring a warrior was worse than fighting him. Vrog leaned closer, his rocky face filling Dave's entire vision. He opened his mouth, revealing rows of black, jagged teeth, and spoke. His voice was a deep, grinding boom that shook the glass walls of the station. He told the human that Earth was weak. He announced to the entire room that a species without claws or armor had no right to speak in the High Council. The general raised his voice so that everyone could hear. He declared that the Krull Empire demanded a tax. If the humans wanted to stay in the council, they had to give all of Earth's minerals to the Krull. They had to surrender their ships. They had to bow down and accept the Krull as their masters. If they refused, Vrog promised to fly his war fleets to Earth and burn the planet until it was nothing but ash and dust. It was an impossible demand. It was extortion. The other aliens in the room looked at the humans with pity. There was no way out. The humans were new, they had no allies, and they were facing the strongest bully in the galaxy. Dave listened to the threats calmly. He waited for Vrog to finish shouting. When the rock monster finally stopped to take a breath, Dave cleared his throat. He spoke softly, but the translation microphones picked up every word. He asked Vrog if he was finished. He asked politely if Vrog would please step aside so the humans could take their seats. Dave explained that they had a lot of paperwork to file and they were already running late. He spoke to the giant warlord as if Vrog were a misbehaving child blocking a doorway. He did not sound like a warrior. He sounded like a disappointed school teacher. This was the breaking point for General Vrog. The politeness was too much to handle. Vrog roared. The sound was so loud that several delicate glass species in the upper rows cracked from the vibration. Vrog slammed his massive fist into his own open palm. The sound was like a cannon blast. He screamed that diplomacy was a game for cowards. He screamed that words were useless. He looked at the High Council judges, who sat on a floating platform above them. He invoked the ancient law. He demanded a trial of blood. The room gasped. The trial of blood was an ancient, barbaric tradition. It had not been used in 1,000 years. It was a duel. The rules were simple and brutal. The leader of one species would fight the leader of the other species. No laser guns, no ships, no armies. Just hand-to-hand combat in the center of the room. The winner would take everything. The loser would lose their freedom and their planet. It was a fight to the death, or until one fighter could no longer stand. Vrog smiled a cruel, jagged smile. He knew he had won. He was 8 feet of living rock and magma. The human was a soft bag of water and bones. The High Council judges looked down nervously. They checked the old law books. They had no choice. If a council member demanded a trial of blood, it had to be granted. The head judge, a tall, thin bird-like creature, spoke into the microphone. He explained the terms to the humans. He told Dave that he could refuse the challenge, but if he refused, Earth would be kicked out of the council and left defenseless. If he accepted, he would have to fight General Vrog right here, right now. The judge looked at Dave with sad eyes. He was basically reading the human his death sentence. The judge asked Dave if he understood that he was about to die. The alien ambassadors held their breath. They expected Dave to panic now. This was real. This wasn't just threats anymore, this was physical combat against a super soldier. The human team behind Dave looked worried. The young woman whispered something to Dave, but Dave just shook his head. He looked at Vrog, who was flexing his muscles and laughing. Vrog was already celebrating his victory. He was imagining how easy it would be to snap the human in half. Dave let out a long, heavy sigh. It was the sigh of a man who had to work on a weekend. He reached up and loosened the knot of his tie. He pulled the tie off and folded it neatly. He handed the tie and his glasses to the assistant behind him. He unbuttoned the top button of his shirt and rolled up his sleeves. His arms were pale and looked very thin compared to the rock monster's arms. Dave looked at the judge and nodded. He said that he accepted the challenge. He said, "Fine. Let's get this over with. I have a dinner reservation at 6. The room erupted in noise. The aliens could not believe it. The human was crazy. He was suicidal. He had just agreed to fight a tank with his bare hands. Vrog laughed so hard that smoke puffed out of his ears. He was delighted. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like gunshots. The stage was set. The diplomats rushed to clear the center of the floor. A force field began to hum around the central area to protect the audience from flying blood and debris. The impossible demand had been made, and to everyone's shock, the small, soft human had said yes. The atmosphere inside the Grand Galactic Hall changed instantly. It was no longer a place for talking or signing treaties. It had become a coliseum. The floating cameras zoomed in close, projecting the image of the center stage onto giant holographic screens so that every creature in the room could see the violence clearly. The air was filled with the sounds of betting. The alien ambassadors were gambling on how long the human would survive. Most of them bet that Dave would be dead in less than 10 seconds. A few optimistic ones bet on 20 seconds. Nobody bet that the human would win. To them, it was like betting that a snowflake would win a fight against a volcano. The odds were impossible. The medical drones hovered near the edge of the force field, ready to clean up the mess once the fight was over. General Vrog began his preparation for the duel. He did not need weapons, but he loved to show off his power. He tapped a button on his wrist, and his battle armor began to shift and lock into place. Metal plates slid over his joints with a loud, mechanical clicking sound. The engines on his back flared to life, glowing with a bright, angry red light. Steam hissed from the vents in his armor. He looked less like a living creature and more like a walking tank. He activated his energy shields, which covered his rocky skin in a shimmering blue layer of electricity. He punched the air, and the sound barrier broke with a deafening crack. He was making sure that the human knew exactly how hopeless this fight was. Vrog wanted Dave to feel fear before the end. He wanted the human to regret ever leaving his small, blue planet. On the other side of the arena, Dave's preparation was very different. It was so simple that it confused everyone watching. Dave did not have a button to summon armor. He did not have a shield generator. He simply stood there and rolled his neck from side to side until it made a small popping sound. He shook his arms out loosely, like a jogger warming up for a morning run. He bounced lightly on his toes a few times. The aliens watched him with wide eyes. They thought he was having a seizure or a panic attack. They could not understand why he was not putting on a helmet. They did not know that Dave didn't own a helmet. To the thousands of spectators, Dave looked like a confused tourist who had wandered into a war zone by mistake. A high-ranking scientist from the tech-obsessed Centauri species floated forward in his chair. He wanted to record the data of the fight. He pointed a high-tech molecular scanner at the two fighters. The results appeared on a massive screen above the arena for everyone to see. This was the moment where the great misunderstanding began. The scanner analyzed General Vrog first. The screen flashed with red warning lights. It showed that Vrog's skin was made of silicon and granite. It showed that his blood was liquid magma. It showed that his muscle density was strong enough to lift a spaceship. The scanner labeled Vrog as a Class 5 planetary threat. The audience nodded. They already knew Vrog was a monster. Then, the scanner turned its blue beam onto Dave. The machine whirred and clicked as it analyzed the human's biology. The results appeared on the screen in soft, harmless green letters. The scanner identified Dave's composition. It showed that he was made mostly of water. It showed calcium bones that looked like thin white sticks compared to Vrog's rock skeleton. It showed soft skin that offered zero protection against heat or sharp objects. The scanner detected no cybernetic implants, no magic energy, and no hidden weapons. The final analysis flashed on the screen: target, biological entity. Threat level, 0. Status, extremely fragile. The crowd let out a collective groan of pity. The science proved it. The human was made of soft meat and water. He was basically a walking water balloon. The aliens looked at Dave with genuine sadness. They thought about how painful it would be to be crushed by a rock monster. They wondered why the human council members had sent such a weak specimen to represent them. They assumed that humans must be a very stupid species to not understand basic biology. The Centauri scientist shook his head and turned off the scanner. He felt that it was a waste of battery power to scan a dead man. The data was clear. Physics was clear. In a collision between a rock and a water balloon, the rock always wins. However, the scanner had missed something important. It was a standard galactic scanner, calibrated for the average gravity of most inhabited worlds. It did not account for the environment of Earth. It saw calcium bones, but it did not measure how incredibly dense those bones were because of Earth's punishing gravity. It saw soft muscle, but it did not understand the concept of adrenaline or the unique way human muscle fibers could snap into action. It saw a fragile creature, but it did not know that humans were persistence hunters who could survive broken bones and keep fighting. The aliens saw water and meat. They did not see the compressed power hidden inside the small frame. They judged the book by its soft cover. General Vrog saw the scan results and laughed. His laughter was a deep, rumbling sound that shook the floor. He pointed a massive, rocky finger at the screen. He mocked Dave, asking if he wanted to surrender now and save everyone the time. Vrog shouted that he would try to be gentle, maybe only breaking 3 or 4 of the human's limbs instead of all of them. He told the crowd to watch closely because the fight would be over in a blink. Vrog was completely relaxed. He dropped his guard. He did not think he needed to defend himself. Why would a mountain need to defend itself against a breeze? Dave ignored the screen. He ignored the laughter. He was busy folding his shirt cuffs neatly so they wouldn't get in the way. He looked calm, almost bored. He checked his wristwatch again. He was calculating how much time he had left before his dinner reservation. He looked up at the towering monster and gave a small, polite smile. It was the smile of a man who knew a secret that nobody else in the room knew. The aliens mistook his calm behavior for shock. They thought his brain had shut down from terror. They whispered that the poor human had gone catatonic with fear. The referee, a hovering droid with a striped shell, floated to the center of the room. The droid asked if both fighters were ready. Vrog roared his agreement, slamming his fists together and creating a shower of sparks. Dave simply nodded his head once. The force field hummed louder, locking the two of them inside the transparent cage. The lights in the hall dimmed, leaving only the spotlight on the center stage. The silence returned, but this time it was the silence of anticipation. The misunderstanding was complete. The galaxy believed they were about to watch an execution. They were prepared to see a tragedy. They had no idea that they were completely wrong about the soft, pink creature standing in the spotlight. The floating referee drone let out a sharp, digital beep that echoed through the massive chamber. A wall of blue energy shimmered into existence around the center stage, sealing the two fighters inside. The force field was there to protect the audience, but everyone in the crowd believed it was there to keep the human from running away. The fight had officially begun. The Grand Galactic Hall fell into a deep, nervous silence. Thousands of aliens leaned forward in their seats, their eyes glued to the center of the room. They were waiting for the splatter. They were waiting for the messy end of the human ambassador. In the front row, the alien diplomats covered their sensitive ears, expecting the loud crunch of bones breaking. General Vrog did not attack immediately. He wanted to savor the moment. He wanted the human to know that death was coming. Vrog stood his ground and revved the engines on his back. The sound was deafening, like a jet plane preparing for takeoff. Black smoke poured from his exhaust vents, filling the arena with the smell of burning fuel and sulfur. Vrog flexed his rocky claws, and the plasma generators in his gauntlets hummed to life. His massive fists began to glow with a blinding purple light. The energy crackled and sparked, hot enough to melt steel. Vrog laughed, a low, cruel sound that vibrated in the floorboards. He was enjoying the fear he thought he saw in the human's eyes. "Do you see this, little meat thing?" Vrog shouted, his voice amplified by his helmet. "This is power. This is the end of your pathetic species." He took a heavy step forward, shattering the floor tile beneath his boot. He raised one glowing fist high into the air. "I will crush you into jelly, and then I will use your planet as a parking lot for my ships." Vrog roared. The roar was so loud that the force field rippled. The crowd shivered. Vrog was a force of nature. He was a living landslide. There was no way to stop him. Dave just stood there. He did not look at the glowing fists. He did not look at the smoke. He was looking at Vrog's feet. Dave was analyzing the alien's stance. He noticed that Vrog was top-heavy. He noticed that the rock monster leaned too far forward when he shouted. To the aliens, Dave looked frozen with terror. But inside Dave's mind, he was just doing simple math. He was calculating distance and speed. He had been in bar fights on Earth that looked more dangerous than this. On Earth, gravity pulled everything down hard. On Earth, things moved fast. Here, in the standard gravity of the space station, Vrog looked like he was moving in slow motion. To Dave, the terrifying rock monster looked like a turtle trying to run. Vrog grew tired of waiting. The human was not screaming, and that was boring. It was time to end it. Vrog triggered the boosters on his armor. Blue fire shot out from his back. He launched himself forward with terrifying speed for a creature of his size. He was like a runaway train. The ground shook violently with every step he took. Boom. 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 He crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat. He raised his right fist, which was glowing with purple energy and burning heat. He aimed a punch directly at the top of Dave's head. It was a killing blow. If it connected, there would be nothing left of the human but a wet stain on the floor. The audience gasped. Some of them looked away. The Zentari scientist watched his monitor, waiting for the human's life signs to flatline. The visual was terrifying, a mountain of rock and metal flying through the air, about to collide with a small, soft man in a white shirt. The wind from Vrog's charge blew Dave's tie over his shoulder. The heat from the plasma fist singed the hairs on Dave's arm. The impact seemed inevitable. It was physics. A large object moving fast cannot be stopped by a small object standing still. But just as the giant fist was about to touch his hair, Dave moved. He did not jump. He did not roll on the ground like an action hero. He simply took one step. It was a small, efficient step to the left. He moved with a speed that the alien eyes could barely track. Because Dave came from a high-gravity world, his muscles were incredibly dense and explosive. In this lighter gravity, he felt light as a feather. He slipped to the side just as Vrog's fist occupied the space where his head had been a millisecond ago. It was the matador move. He let the bull charge past him. Vrog's eyes went wide behind his visor. He felt his fist hit nothing but empty air. He had put all his weight, all his power, and all his booster engine thrust into that one punch. He expected to hit resistance. He expected to hit bone and meat. When he hit nothing, his own momentum became his enemy. He could not stop. He was too heavy and moving too fast. He stumbled forward, his massive feet scrabbling for grip on the slick metal floor. He looked ridiculous, like a giant trying to catch his balance on ice. Dave watched Vrog stumble past him. As the rock monster flew by, Dave calmly reached out and brushed a speck of dust off his shoulder. He looked unimpressed. He turned his head to watch the result of the charge. Vrog continued to fly forward, unable to slow down. The giant warlord crashed face first into the blue energy force field on the other side of the arena. The sound was thunderous. The entire space station vibrated. The force field flared bright white as it absorbed the impact of the 800-pound rock monster. Vrog bounced off the energy wall and fell onto his back with a loud, metallic clatter. Pieces of his decorative armor fell off. His engines sputtered and coughed smoke. He lay there for a moment, legs kicking in the air like an overturned beetle. The glowing purple light on his fists flickered and went out. The Grand Galactic Hall went completely silent again. This silence was different from before. It was the silence of total confusion. The aliens blinked their eyes. They looked at the empty space where Dave had been standing, and then at the human who was now standing 3 feet to the left. They looked at the mighty General Vrog lying in a heap on the floor. Their brains could not process what had just happened. The scanner said the human was slow and weak. But the human had moved faster than a striking snake. He missed, whispered a diplomat from the aquatic sector. The crawl never misses. Dave adjusted his glasses, which had slipped slightly down his nose during the dodge. He looked at the pile of groaning rock on the floor. He looked up at the stunned audience and shrugged. He didn't even look out of breath. He hadn't even broken a sweat. He looked like he was waiting for a bus. He spoke to the drone referee, his voice calm and level. "Is he okay? He hit that wall pretty hard. I don't want to be responsible for any brain damage." "Well, any more brain damage?" Vrog roared in pure fury as he scrambled back to his feet. His pride was hurt more than his body. He had been made to look like a fool in front of the entire galaxy. He turned around, his yellow eyes burning with hate. He scraped his claws against the floor, creating sparks. He realized that the human was fast. Okay, he thought. Fast is annoying. But fast cannot hurt me. I am made of rock. He is made of soft meat. Even if he can dodge, he cannot hurt me. Vrog convinced himself that it was just a lucky slip. He prepared to attack again, but this time, he would not be so careless. The crowd began to whisper excitedly. The betting odds on the screens began to flicker and change. The human was not dead yet. The human had survived the first charge. For the first time, a small seed of doubt was planted in the minds of the council. Maybe, Just maybe, the scanner was wrong. Or maybe, the human was just very, very lucky. They watched as Dave rolled up his sleeves a little higher, revealing his forearms. He wasn't running away. He was waiting for Vrog to come back. The first move was over, and the human was still standing. General Vrog peeled himself off the force field wall with a low, guttural growl that sounded like grinding gears. His humiliation was absolute. He could hear the confused whispers of the crowd, and every whisper felt like a needle sticking into his pride. He was the warlord of the crawl. He was the eater of moons. He had never been embarrassed in battle before, certainly not by a soft, pink creature that looked like a shaved monkey. The shame turned into a white-hot rage inside his chest. He decided that he was done playing with his food. He was done trying to scare the human. Now, he just wanted to erase him from existence. Vrog reached down and twisted a dial on his chest armor. The safety limiters on his plasma engine disengaged. A warning siren began to wail from his suit, but Vrog ignored it. The temperature in the arena began to rise rapidly. The metal floor plates around Vrog's feet started to glow red and then warp from the intense heat radiating from his body. His rocky skin turned from gray to a bright, angry orange. He was turning himself into a walking furnace. He planned to get close enough to the human to simply burn him alive with thermal radiation. He roared, and a jet of fire shot from his mouth. No more tricks. Vrog screamed. Stand still and die. The air shimmered so violently that Vrog looked like a mirage. He began to march forward. He did not run this time. He marched with heavy, deliberate steps, spreading his arms wide to prevent the human from dodging sideways again. He was closing the net. Dave watched the walking inferno approach him. He felt the wave of heat hit his face. It felt like opening an oven door to check on a turkey. He loosened his collar a little more. He realized that this fight was becoming a nuisance. If he waited too long, the heat might actually ruin his shirt, and it was his favorite shirt. Dave also knew that he couldn't dodge forever. The arena was small, and the big rock monster was taking up a lot of space. Dave did a quick calculation in his head. He needed to end this immediately. He checked his stance. He planted his feet firmly on the metal floor. He stopped bouncing. He became perfectly still. The crowd watched in horror. They thought the human had finally given up. They saw Dave stand his ground as the burning monster got closer. 10 feet. 5 feet. The heat was scorching. The Zentari scientist covered his eyes. Everyone expected Dave to burst into flames. Vrog saw the human stop moving and grinned a jagged, fiery grin. He raised both fists high above his head for a double-handed smash. He was going to hammer the human into the ground like a nail. Vrog put every ounce of his strength, every pound of his rocky weight, and all the power of his hydraulic armor into this swing. He left his chest and head completely open, confident that the human could do nothing to stop him. That was his mistake. Dave was not freezing up. He was loading a spring. Humans evolved on Earth, a planet with crushing gravity compared to most habitable worlds. To survive on Earth, humans developed dense, heavy bones and compact muscles that were like steel cables. In this lower gravity, Dave's body was a biological weapon. As Vrog's arms went up, opening his guard, Dave stepped inside. It was a classic boxing move. He stepped deep into the danger zone, right against the burning heat of Vrog's chest. Dave rotated his hips. The power started in his feet, pushing against the floor with enough force to dent the metal plate. The energy traveled up his legs, through his core, and into his right shoulder. He didn't use magic. He didn't use technology. He used torque. He threw a simple, technical right hook. His fist traveled upward in a tight arc. It moved faster than the eye could follow. It broke the sound barrier just inches from Vrog's face. Snap. The sound of the air breaking was sharp and loud. The connection was brutal. Dave's fist, a dense block of calcium and muscle conditioned by Earth's heavy gravity, collided with Vrog's jaw. To the aliens, Vrog looked like he was made of stone. But to Dave, Vrog's rock skin was more like dried clay or pumice. It was brittle. It was light. The impact was devastating. The force of the punch transferred instantly from Dave's knuckles into the general's skull. The sound was like a cannon firing inside a library. It was a wet, crunchy sound that made every creature in the audience flinch. The shockwave from the punch blew the smoke away from the center of the arena. Time seemed to freeze for a second. The viewers saw Vrog's helmet shatter into 1,000 sparkling pieces. They saw the shockwave ripple through the rock monster's entire body. His head snapped back so violently that the back of his skull hit his own armor. General Vrog, the 8-foot-tall war machine, did not just fall down. He was launched. The force of the human's punch lifted him off his feet. He flew backward through the air, his arms flailing helplessly. He looked like a rag doll that had been kicked by a giant. He flew 10 feet, 20 feet, tumbling end over end. He crashed onto the ambassador's table near the edge of the force field. The heavy table collapsed under his weight. Vrog slid across the floor, leaving a trail of sparks and broken armor pieces. He came to a stop against the glass wall. His engines whined and then died with a sad sputtering sound. His glowing orange skin faded back to a dull, cold gray. He did not move. His eyes rolled back into his rocky head. Dave stood in the center of the arena, his fist still extended in the follow-through position. A small wisp of steam rose from his knuckles where he had made contact with the hot rock. He exhaled sharply, a boxer's breath. He shook his hand out, grimacing slightly. "Ouch," he muttered. "That guy has a really hard chin." He checked his knuckles to make sure he hadn't broken the skin. He looked at the unconscious monster lying in the wreckage of the table. Dave looked disappointed. He had expected a bit more of a fight from the safety officer of the galaxy. The silence that followed was total. It was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. The floating camera zoomed in on Vrog's face. His jaw was hanging at a strange angle. He was completely knocked out. The Zentari scientist stared at his data pad. The reading was impossible. The amount of kinetic energy the human had generated in that one punch was equivalent to a small tactical missile. And he had done it with his bare hand. The scientist looked at the fragile human with new eyes. He realized the scanner was wrong. The human wasn't soft. He was dense. He was a compressed brick of violence wrapped in soft skin. Dave lowered his hand and adjusted his shirt cuffs again. He looked around the silent room. He saw the thousands of terrified faces staring at him. He realized the fight was over. He walked over to where his tie was lying on the chair. He picked it up and started putting it back on. He looked at the drone referee, who was hovering nearby, shaking with fear. "Is that it?" Dave asked calmly. "Or is there a round two? Because I really don't want to miss the buffet." The punch had lasted less than a second, but it had changed the history of the galaxy forever. The image of the small human knocking the giant rock monster across the room was burned into everyone's mind. The illusion of alien superiority was shattered along with Vrog's jaw. The monsters were not the ones with the claws and scales. The real monster was the small man in the white shirt who was currently straightening his tie and thinking about dinner. The silence that filled the Grand Galactic Hall was heavier than any gravity well. It was a silence born of pure shock. Thousands of alien eyes were locked onto the unconscious body of General Vrog. The mighty warlord, who had never lost a battle in 50 years, was crumpled like a piece of paper against the far wall. His armor was smoking. His jaw was broken. He looked small and defeated. Then, the eyes of the crowd slowly turned to the center of the arena. They looked at the human. Dave was standing there, brushing a little bit of rock dust off his white shirt. He did not look like a warrior god. He did not look like a monster. He looked like an accountant who had just finished filing a tax return. This contrast, the terrifying power hidden inside such a boring-looking creature, was what scared the aliens the most. The medical drones buzzed into the arena. They were small floating robots with flashing red lights. They swarmed over Vrog's body, scanning him for damage. The diagnosis was projected onto the main screen for everyone to see. The list of injuries was long. Vrog had a shattered mandible, a concussion, and 3 compressed vertebrae. The medical scanner added a note at the bottom, "Cause of injury, blunt force trauma from high-density impact." The aliens whispered to one another. They had thought the human was soft. They had thought he was weak. But the scanner proved that the human's fist was harder than a meteorite. The Zentari scientist, who had mocked Dave earlier, was now frantically typing on his computer. He was recalculating the data on Earth. Suddenly, the scientist gasped. His voice was amplified by his microphone, and it echoed through the silent room. He announced that he had made a terrible mistake. He explained that the scanner had been calibrated for standard galactic gravity. He projected a new image of Earth onto the screens. He explained that Earth was a Category 12 death world. The gravity on Earth was double or triple that of most inhabited planets. He explained that to survive on such a heavy world, humans had evolved bones that were as dense as iron and muscles that were like hydraulic pistons. He told the crowd that the atmospheric pressure on Earth was crushing. He listed the dangerous bacteria, the extreme weather, and the predators. The realization hit the crowd like a wave. The humans were not soft. They were compressed. They were evolution survivors. The mood in the room shifted from mockery to terror. The alien ambassadors looked at the human delegation with fear. They realized that every human on that team was a biological superweapon. The 2 assistants behind Dave, who were still typing on their pads, were not ignored anymore. Now, the aliens wondered if they could also punch through rock walls. The Drexel ambassador, the giant crab creature, quietly moved his chair further away from the human section. He pulled his legs in, terrified that one of the humans might accidentally step on him. The predators in the room, the ones with claws and fangs, suddenly felt very vulnerable. They realized that their claws would probably break if they tried to scratch a human's skin. Dave finished fixing his tie. He smoothed his hair down. He picked up his leather bag from the floor. He looked perfectly calm. He did not celebrate. He did not scream or beat his chest. He simply walked over to the drone referee. The drone floated backward, terrified of being punched. Dave spoke into the microphone. His voice was polite and steady. He asked if the trial of blood was concluded. He asked if the humans were now allowed to take their seats. He did not demand anything. He asked nicely. But everyone knew that it wasn't really a question. It was an order. The High Council judges were shaking. The head judge, the bird-like creature, tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He tapped his gavel nervously. He announced that the human, Dave, was the winner. He declared that according to the ancient laws, the Krull Empire had lost. The judge looked at the Krull delegation. The Krull soldiers, who were usually aggressive and loud, were standing perfectly still. Their leader had been destroyed in one hit. Their morale was broken. They looked at Dave with wide, yellow eyes. They dropped their weapons on the floor. Clatter. Clatter. It was the sound of total surrender. They did not want to fight the density monster. They did not want to end up like Vrog. Dave walked up the stairs to the human seats. The crowd parted for him. Giant aliens, who were 10 feet tall, scrambled to get out of his way. They pressed themselves against the walls to let the small human pass. It was a funny sight, but nobody laughed. Dave sat down in his chair. He opened his leather bag and took out a bottle of water and a small sandwich. The entire Galactic Council watched him unwrap the sandwich. They watched him take a bite. To them, this was the ultimate display of dominance. He had just crushed a warlord, and now he was eating a snack as if nothing had happened. It proved that fighting Vrog was not a challenge for him. It was just a chore. The judge cleared his throat again. He asked for a vote on Earth's membership into the council. Usually, these votes took weeks of debate. Usually, there was yelling and arguing. Today, there was no debate. The judge asked who was in favor of admitting Earth. Every single hand in the room went up. Thousands of hands, tentacles, claws, and fins raised into the air instantly. Even the Krull delegation raised their hands. They voted for Earth because they wanted Earth on their side. They realized that it was better to have the humans as friends than as enemies. The vote was unanimous. Earth was accepted as a senior member of the council in record time. Dave wiped a crumb from his lip. He looked at the vote count on the screen and nodded. He leaned into his microphone. "Thank you," he said. "We look forward to peaceful trade and cooperation. We humans prefer peace. Fighting is messy. And it ruins good suits." He gestured to the dust on his shoulder. The aliens nodded eagerly. Yes, peace. Peace was good. Nobody wanted to see a human ruin another suit. The message was clear: the humans were nice, polite, and friendly. But if you pushed them, if you threatened them, they would end you with a single strike. The session was adjourned. The aliens rushed for the exits, eager to send messages back to their home planets. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Do not mess with Earth. Do not challenge the small pink ones. They are made of steel and gravity. The legend of One Punch Dave was born in that moment. The Krull Empire withdrew its fleets from the human sector within the hour. They sent a gift basket of rare minerals to Earth as an apology. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. The era of bullies was over. The era of the terrifyingly polite humans had begun. Dave stood up and checked his watch. He smiled at his team. "Right on time," he said. "The meeting is over, and we can still make the 6 p.m. dinner reservation. I heard the food station on level 4 makes great pizza." His assistants smiled and packed up their things. They walked out of the Grand Galactic Hall, chatting about toppings and cheese. Behind them, the strongest warriors in the galaxy watched them leave with a mixture of awe and horror. The humans walked out just as they had walked in, small, soft, and unassuming. But now, the galaxy knew the truth. Diplomacy had not ended because of a war. It had ended because one human wanted to go to dinner, and nobody was brave enough to stop him.